Mega Man X Dive has a lot of characters pulled from all over the Mega Man franchise, but it also has a handful of the dreaded OCs. This is pretty common with crossover titles, new characters being invented and thrown in, normally as a way to facilitate the plot, serving as a bit of a nexus to vaguely explain why so many people from various timelines are suddenly winding up in one place, while at the same time, perhaps serving as a self-insert for the player or developer to pal around with the main characters and be their best friend and get told how cool and smart and powerful they are, as a bit of an ego trip. X Dive has 6 such characters, so why don't we take a look at each and decide whether they fit in with the rest of the franchise or not. To set a few ground rules, due to the plot being very much its own thing and poorly translated, I'm not going to touch too much on their personalities, just designs, and just their base models at that, since there are a lot of alts. And I'm also going to throw this out there, I'm not 100% sure on how to pronounce some of these names. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and these are Capcom Taiwan's 6 Mega Man X OCs. Do not steal. Wait a sec, why are there 8 chapters, outside of the intro and final thoughts? We'll start out with the face of the game, Rico. Just for basic Reploid stuff, she has the thick wrist coverings and the bulky boots. Her color scheme is largely white and that cool light blue, though there's some dark off blues, yellows, and oranges thrown in. It's not the most common palette, but it does work and it makes her design even more striking. It gives off a very chilly feel, like Cool Mint. She could probably market some gum on the side. As for the more specific stuff, she has a similar shade of blue for her hair, with the side ponytail held in place with a metal ring with 2 points coming off of it that make it look almost like a cloth accessory. She has a white headset that looks kind of like a hairband from the top, with the mic in front of her. Her shoulders are rounded but have an outer layer that come out into a sort of point that looks neat. The orange bit on her top reminds me of a tie, with 2 folds that come out from underneath looking like the folds of a suit, but you can still tell they're metal. And yes, she has a prominent chest, since this is a waifu game. She has a pair of shorts that I like, since they're reminiscent of the undies X and Zero have over their bodysuits, but what Rico's covers is closer to Ale from ZX's shorts, so it works as a reference to multiple series. Even more notable though, are the metal triangular tubing that comes off her hips, ending in yellow vents. It makes it look like she's wearing a skirt, yet is undeniably mechanic in nature. Overall, I think her design works really well for the series. The tie and skirt make it look like she could be an office worker answering calls, which kinda goes with the whole navigator job, yet all the parts that should be cloth are still obviously made of metal, combining the mundane with the sci-fi, an aesthetic I love. She has all the basic Reploid trademarks on top of that, and is pretty darn adorable too. I kinda wanna say that she looks like a cross between the X series and Vocaloid, and I swear that's not just because I read a Hyrule Warriors comic that compared one of their original characters, Lana, to Hatsune Miku. Still, the blue hair in a cutesy style is a bit of a coincidence, though it's not like anybody owns the trademark for that. To get back to the point at hand though, yeah, I like Rico's design, and if they were to put her in a mainline game, I wouldn't complain. Next is Aiko, who, from what I can follow, is supposed to be an alternate, split-off version of Rico. While I could see them being sisters, I wouldn't mark them as being twins. Still, they do share a lot of similarities. Their boots, wrist, and tie are all the same, and while the mic is missing, she also has a hairband, the color scheme for Aiko just looking a bit more washed out. The darker blue has been replaced with black though, making her look a bit more serious, and she has these pinkish red lines over her body, which will be important going forward, and an upside-down lightning bolt scar under one of her eyes. As for her hair, it's kind of an off-white, not quite gray, with some of Rico's blue layered underneath, and the ponytail is instead untied to give one side some extra length. As for the big differences though, we have her wings, which start out metal but have some weird data-looking stuff pointing out behind her. It almost looks like a corrupted version of what Mega Man EXE's hub style has going on, and given that both her and Rico interact with data, it kinda works. Her eyes seem emotionless, with extra ridges thrown in, making them look like camera lenses. It's not the type of eyes we typically get in the X series, but it's not that far out of left field either, though I would say it fit in better with Battle Network. For upper armor, hers doesn't cover as much as Rico's, it almost looking like the front and back pieces are just there to hold a few things in place. As for her skirt, it looks like it's actual cloth, a small loincloth in front and 2 bisected flaps sticking out on either side. Actual clothing is a little uncommon for Reploids, but I guess Gate did have a lab coat, then cape. I think the most notable element is all the extra exposed skin, specifically around her shoulders and thighs. At the risk of sounding puritanical, most robots or navis don't have exposed skin outside of their face, with rock and roll being some of the few exceptions. One of the others is Marino for Command Mission, which is a spin-off game, and even then, it's only around her thighs, and only when she transforms into her Quicksilver hyper mode, so very rarely. And before anyone mentions Lair, her stomach is slightly darker than her face, so I attribute that to being more of what I refer to as a bodysuit rather than skin. Though, let's face it, while I assume that all of the armor and bodysuits are something each Reploid wears on top of their bodies, each piece could actually be a fully integrated part of them. If the swimsuits ever become canon though, that's going to open up a lot of discussion, especially with the navals. Do Reploids have umbilical cords? Going back to Ico though, while the exposed skin thing isn't a rule and you could easily say it's the same thing as the black section on Zero's design, it's still unusual. As for whether she works as an X character or even a net navi, I'd say she's close, and they could bring her back for a mainline if they made a few tweaks. Okay, full disclosure, Droitclair is my favorite design here. Well, maybe other than one of the bonuses. She's very, very Halloween looking. She's mainly black and purple, with some of those red, kinda pinkish lines that I mentioned with Ico thrown in. Her hair's that kind of hot pink magenta shade, which gives her some warmer colors that's slightly offset by the blues mixed in. From what I can tell from the dialogue, I think they meant to give her a tsundere personality, and twin tails are a type for that trope. Plus, she has the metal hair ties that stick up almost like blades. The purple, pink, and blue in her eyes are really striking, almost mesmerizing. And she has a teardrop under each, as a sign that she killed 2 people in prison. As for her clothes, it's kinda hard to tell what's armor and what's cloth in some places. Around her wrist and collar, I'd say are metal, but lower torso and dress cloth. She has the big dumb Reploid boots, but with ridges that look kind of like straps and wedges taken out of her soles so that they look like fashionable girl shoes, though I'm not up enough on clothing to know what the design is called. And then she has the shoulder bag that's a broken heart. Kinda mundane, but does work with her overall vibe. Droitclair also has a pale face and white gloves, so it's kinda hard to tell whether we have the same thing going on that we do with Ico, with the exposed skin. I think the shade of white on her shoulders and legs match her face more. On top of all that, she seems to be using weird dark magic and spirits in her art, which ain't really something that pops up too much in the X games, though Zero Virus and Zero Nightmare look kinda close. She has a spooky design with a lot of fashionable elements, putting her into a kind of creepy cute territory, though with more of a focus on the latter, but as for whether she'd work as a Reploid, I'd say no. As brilliant as I think her boots are, everything else kinda strays outside of the series' typical aesthetic. She could maybe work as a human-based Mega Man in ZX, or as an exception if they brought back Rakana and made Droitclair her subordinate, since she also wore a good bit of cloth, used magic, and her partner Garrett's armor was somewhere between a Reploid's and an actual Knight, but we'd be making some pretty big allowances in either case. Next is Angepitoyeir, who is a boy despite my initial guesses. He has pink hair with 2 little wings coming off of it. Since he's an angel, they kinda remind me of Razafon, but it could also be their way of flipping the Devilman hair wings on its head. He has a shawl that looks like it has a hood attached, along with a cape that kinda spreads out like wings behind him. As for his Reploid traits, he has the buster, wrist, and boots, all white with gold trim, sometimes in the shape of a heart. Then you get the light purple and pink thrown in to keep the cute aesthetic going. There's also the circular bits where his ears should be. Then you can spot some black, skin-type parts around his neck and skivvies, with the red lines to indicate his virus corruption in the story. And then you see a good bit of skin, perhaps the most proportionally of our 6. While I've kind of listed it as a detractor in the past, I'm gonna give him a pass for it for a very specific reason. Astro Boy. There are a lot of classic anime inspiration for character designs in Mega Man, like Kashan and Quickman, Rush and Friender, and I think the most obvious is Rock himself with Astro Boy. Heck, just look at this scene from the original. Thus, while a little weird when standing next to the rest of the cast, if they want to throw in a young boy who dashes through the air with jet boots while wearing black undies, in this context, I will allow it. And hey, if his head wings are another reference, all the better. While I think Angepitoyeir would work best in Classic, I think he just works in general as an exception due to the angle just discussed. Eratoeir. having trouble with her, to the point where this is actually the last bit I'm typing out for the video. And it's getting late too. I kinda just wanna say big tittied anime woman and call it there, but I can probably come up with a bit more. Okay, so the big thing is that she takes a little bit from most of the other characters. While hers is a lighter shade, she has Droitclair's hair colors, Rico's hair tie, Vaya's shoulders, a certain other character's chest jewel, pay attention for that later, and Angepitoyeir's white and gold, as well as the black bodysuit with red corruption lines running across it, along with his heavenly theme. Heck, she looks like a freaking goddess, coming down and reaching out her hand to you. As for things unique to her, she seems to have at least one dangling earring, and 2 points sticking up from her hair with 2 metal somethings underneath that look kinda like cat ears. While she has the big dumb Reploid boots, hers travel up a bit higher and might actually be made of cloth, since you can see where they fold to accommodate her knee joints. She also has a crotch plate for some reason, though Flame Mammoth and Trombone do too, so fair game. She has the cyber halo behind her head and the gold pins with the pearls on the ends hanging off her skirt, which might be significant in some mythology, but all I can say is that they look fancy. She also has some exposed skin, but with her it's really weird. Whereas the others we've talked about had them in sensible spots to allow for their skin to breathe, here it looks like her spandex got nicked and the hole just stretched out with the cloth. Though given that they're placed symmetrically on the thighs and underboob, both kind of sought after areas, you can tell this was on purpose. Between her jiggle physics and use of ara ara in dialogue, as well as her role in the story, it's obvious that she was meant to be the busty older sister archetype and was put in solely for fan service. They weren't even subtle. While she does implement elements of the other characters really well, looking at her, I don't really get any Reploid vibes and would sooner assume that she was a human or otherworldly being, likely from another series. While I won't go so far as to say I hate her design, I don't think she really works for Mega Man, and I feel like they made the angle they were working with her a little too blatant. Moving on to Vaya, and he's just a zero recolor. Rather than red, he's minty blue, and with the whites already there, this ties his color scheme into Rico. I already talked about it when I did her, so I won't repeat myself other than to say that this should probably be considered the colors that best represent the full game. Anyway, his hair is gray, rather than blonde, which links him to Ico as well, though without knowing their relationship, I don't think you'd immediately fixate on that detail. His face is just a void with 2 eyes, I guess to add to his mysterious aura. And he has rounded shoulders, like Zero did in X1. Fitting, given that he rescues you a few times, once against violent ride armor. I feel very conflicted about saying whether I think he works as an X character, since if I say no, that's like saying Zero doesn't fit, but if I say yes, it's like acknowledging a straight up ripoff. I mean, he has more going on than Nightmare Zero, but while I'm loath to defend X6, they were meant to be more of a ghost of Zero rather than an original character, do not steal. I mean, I think they do give reasons for why he appears this way, taking a familiar form that you, the player, could trust, but it's not like we ever met his real form before, and our first encounter has Vaya helping you, which does enough to make him seem trustworthy. The in-between scene dialogues doing more to make you doubt him than how he looks. And I mean, what kind of series just takes their coolest character, changes up their color scheme and a few details to make them look edgier, and tries to sell them to you as a brand new character? Oh, that's right. I buy all his games, I'm allowed to make fun of him. Anyway, Vaya could work if he was put in the game specifically as someone trying to copy Zero's abilities and not being too creative in the design department either. So you know, a plagiarist villain. Okay, so what if you took Vaya's color scheme, kept Zero's boots, stole Gate's shoulder pads, and gave him beautiful anime man hair? Well, you'd still have Vaya, but his true form, Vaya Square, unless that square's some Greek letter I'm unfamiliar with. If it wasn't in math class, I probably never learned it. Still, there's a bit more to him than that. He has a big red jewel on his chest, like the one he had on his head in his previous form, and gold trim to impress upon you how powerful he is. And for some reason, he seems to have a weird Batman utility belt? He has the reddish-pink corruption lines and that weird aura behind him as well. Part of it forms wings that also look kind of like a malevolent face, Some of it looks like tears in reality, and some look like data, kinda like the wings Ico was sporting. It all feels like a little much, but spoiler, he is the final boss. The menu pretty much tells you that though, so I don't feel too bad about saying it. While threatening auras like this aren't unheard of, they typically are reserved for big bads like Awaken Zero or Sigma. And can we talk about how he's what I refer to as generically handsome? Like, his face has nice proportions, but there's no features that really make him stand out, other than his golden eyes if you're the type to stare into them. No distinguished scar like Axel, no chiseled chin like Sigma, no determined eyes like X or Zero, he's just good looking but for no real reason you could pick out. This kinda continues with his lack of anything on his head. Each of the playable characters in the main games have cool helmets that are easy to recognize, and even when you get to the ladies with their lovely locks, the navigators still have something going on, like the goggles that it looks like Lair can pull down over their eyes, or the headset Aelia has, that Rico seems to have taken inspiration from. If you look real closely, you can see that Vaya still has the ear covers in this form, but other than that, he just has hair. Sure, beautiful would be shown in hair, but I mean, come on. Plenty of anime men do. So, does he work for the X series? I guess, even if I'm not all that enthralled by his design. I guess if they gave him some big, dumb, obvious robotic headpiece, I could tolerate its existence, though cool off on some of the angry aura stuff. I don't think he's earned the right to be the most powerful guy ever, or any of the other Chuny OC stuff they slapped on him in X-Dive. Iris Another is kind of an original character for the game. I mean, if you take two existing characters and slap them together, can you copyright the result? Do the people who do that Pokemon Combiner program own the rights to what pops out? Still, she kinda fits the theme, and I kinda wanna talk about her, so... Anyway, this is a fusion of Colonel and Iris, retaining the latter's name and a good bit of her looks. Iris's clothes were largely red and blue, while the Colonel's was white and black and red and gold. So we have an Iris dressed primarily in red, with several of Colonel's colors thrown in to compensate for his sister's body being used as the base. She keeps a few blues in her jewels though. Anyway, Iris is now taller, getting some of the Colonel's height, and her hair's not quite as fluffy or long, looking a bit more organized and cool as opposed to cute. It's tied back with a red ring near the back of her skull, as opposed to her blue one, which she previously had about halfway down the mask. It looks like it get in the way less this way, which works given her combat focus. As for her garbs, she has a red coat and white pants, which looks like it could be a military uniform but also strikes me as one for horse riding. With the gold inner lining, it certainly looks pretty fancy. She has a belt to pull the look together, and the black around her ankles and wrist have slits in them that I'm not sure what they're there for, but certainly look tough and industrial. And she has the rounded shoulders for ease of movement. In fact, I'd say more of her clothes are probably actually metal. While it's pretty subtle, the way the light shines off of it, the little vents here and there, and the obvious joints, and that lower part of the suit that opens up like pliable cloth but doesn't bend inward when she rests her hand on it, make it so that you can still get robot vibes, even if some of the details aren't as obvious as with the other characters. Her sword has a rounded hilt, kinda like a rapier, and between that and her color scheme, especially the gold bits, she looks quite dashing and regal. She carries herself seriously, but with a calm and relaxed expression, which is somewhere between the sweet and caring ones Iris would wear and Colonel's more serious disposition, making her a good middle ground between the two. And hey, since those two are already established X characters, their fusion of course works for the series too. Honestly, Iris Another might be my favorite thing to come out of X-Dive. They're just so perfect. So there you go, 6, kinda 7, kind of 8 new characters made specially for X-Dive. Kinda weird that most of them don't feel all that much like Reploids, them doing the bare minimum with boots and wrist, and then seeming like they're trying more to stay in theme with each other than this series. But then again, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way. Robot Masters, Reploids, Net Navis, Pseudoroids, Mega Men, EM wave changes, each of these is kinda their own thing, so maybe these guys are too. While they have the most in common with Reploids and Navis, since the lore seems to suggest that they exist more within a bug on your memory card rather than in a realistic or wider net setting, maybe it's fine that they don't fall completely in line. Still though, It wouldn't surprise me with X-Type's popularity if Capcom tried to sneak them into something mainline at some point. Plus, Not Zero still kinda bugs me, so it's worth thinking about how they fit in. But what do you think? Do these characters feel like they belong to the franchise? Do you like them? Would you want them to come back? And are there any other designs you'd want me to pick apart? I typically do this thing within the context of Robot Master vs NetNavis, but let's face it, not everyone's gonna get a turn with that. For right now though, thanks for watching, maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man, and perhaps I'll see you next time. For everlasting peace.